What's up, everybody? This is Carrick with ACG, and as always, it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. And today we're taking a look at the fantasy trip across the far fields of the Deadfire Archipelago with Pillars 2, with you as the Watcher and a ragtag team of friends, comrades, and paid-for help as you attempt to put the world's largest genie back in its bottle in the form of an ancient god tear-assing across the world like Zeus driving a huge meat suit. But make no mistake, many changes have happened to the world and to how you interact with the different characters in it, and those have been added to the typical Pillars of Eternity gameplay, but here, one of the largest changes is the ability to sail the one giant sea on your own sailing vessel, the Defiance, and others as you purchase them. So let's sit back and see if Pillars of Eternity 2 can shore up some of the original game's issues and sail into success, or if it crashes on the shore, some derelict result of random ideas smashed into a party-based role-playing game like a group made entirely of rangers. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. Aptly subtitled video games, what would happen if Hulk really smashed and the absence of Vancian magic? Graphics are up first. You know, it's entirely instantly noticeable that some changes to the lighting system have been done here in Pillars 2, and we've discussed some of these before, but the flickering and self-shadowing light of someone's lantern shield, or the multicolored lighting across your entire party's faces as you circle that one last remaining bad guy and everyone tries to tuck him into a dirt nap while simultaneously lighting him on fire, scaring the crap out of him, and kicking him in the nuts on the way down is done incredibly well here. It's fantastic stuff, and while the first game's Rainbows Gone Renegade kind of color explosions of some of the battles does remain here in most ways, and I'll talk about why that's a little bit lessened in a second, I have to admit it really is impressive. It also goes an incredible way to make the world feel a bit more cohesive here, like the characters are inhabiting it and affected by it versus the more restricted effects in the previous game. Now, this is done with a variety of improvements to the lighting and shading engine in the game, as well as a deft hand at adding bloom effects and ambient occlusion and various other more advanced shader technologies. What occurs then is a moment when you see Pillars 2 and everything actually feels like a bit of part of the world. And talking a little bit about character models, animation, and the world dynamics itself, those are also improved with a variety of weather systems affecting the world as they occur. Wind blowing through trees, characters holding arms above their heads against a storm, and changes of other kinds. Character idle animations are phenomenal, from the lighting of a pipe as a character sits back to watch you become the biggest asshat this side of pretty much ever, or the shaking of a shield lantern to wake it up, really do add to the atmosphere here. And the up-close models actually look really good. They're very improved from the first, which, while not really terrible, they did carry sort of a Harlequin humped an oak tree kind of facial structure, and that simple complexity is pretty much gone in this game. Some of the characters still look a little bit rough, but nothing near that. What this does do as well is makes the entire game look like it went through one single graphical improvement as a balanced update, and not one area dramatically improved while others were left behind. Of course, that doesn't mean everything is good. In some locations, the backgrounds can look almost low resolution and a bit PS3-ish, in fact, and a lot of that's probably because you can zoom all the way into a wood beam or some other structure in a dungeon and see it, but it was a little bit noticeable. Additionally, when forested areas come up, and there's a couple here, they're particularly large locations, in fact, the textures on the ground can be noticeably flat and lack this feeling of defined 3D shadowing and depth that a lot of the other locations have. This is particularly notable in some of the jungle areas, as I said before. Overall, with everything taken into effect graphically, at least when it comes to its presentation overall, there's a huge increase. Now I'm going to talk about performance in a second, and I was disappointed to see so few adjustments available in the graphics setting, especially as this game does a lot more graphically, and I would have liked the ability for some people with lower cards to maybe turn some of those off. Performance-wise, though, it was mostly great, with a little bit of a mixed bag here and there, and word of warning, the devs actually did state they know a couple locations that need some performance improvements that would be done pre to everybody getting it, so some of these may not actually occur to you. First, I will say this. 4K 60 frames per second is doable a surprising amount of the time. Almost all of the areas with my current i7 at 4.6 and a 1080. And of course, those are high-end specs. So I also test on a mid-range with a 980, and that drops it to about 1440p or 1080p with those settings on max again, even though there aren't a lot of options. That leaves you with solid gameplay, even when 5 spells are lighting an area around you. However, once the fog of war is removed from some of these areas, that frame rate does begin to dip a bit. That being said, with the improvements and the ability to run this much of the time in 4K on the higher end system or 1440p on middling systems, it really does show an artistic prowess that I love. I have to say, as a package, I adore the changes in Pillars 2. The moment you walk in and you see this spherical globe of stasis creating a fishbowl and seeing the fish swim around and shadows and lights cast accurately, it's hard not to instantly be at least a little bit impressed. Overall, like I said, pretty damn good. Sound, music, and voice.
Not a problem.
The boats of our decorated armada have orders which spread them thinly across the archipelago. Rauatai finds itself in need of a privateer.
Aye, but almost mad ain't fully mad.
And let's talk about music first. Now, due to the Kickstarter hitting its funding amount, composer Justin Bell was able to go fully orchestral in the game's soundtrack. Here, it's really used to an excellent effect. It's easily one of the most melodic and just overall fitting soundtracks of a game this year. The best way to explain the difference to anybody wondering is while using samples and synthesized instruments, you can absolutely get the same piece of music. There's a variability and various settings on the different instruments and just the feel of the instruments themselves that comes through the music, even particular musicians' play styles that can add to that wider tapestry of an audio piece. There's one track here that should just be called Layer of the White Weirdness that starts out incredibly low and airy and then really shifts a bit into something truly that I didn't expect, and that use of various instruments to tell tales is done well. Overall, loved it. Voice. So just like the creepy old lady in Dune tells Muad'Dib fears the mind killer, so too is bad voice acting the Achilles heel of pretty much anything it's in. And sadly, Pillars seems to have a bit more of that than the last go-around. First, the good. I really did like the gods that you end up talking to. Some of the various leaders and folks so underhanded that living in a place with the word under in it doesn't do them a disservice. Those were all really enjoyable, and the game doubles down. There is a shit ton of voice here, as I said before. But once again, we see the same thing come up that's come up in the original, and it might be a little bit more noticeable here. For example, a couple characters completely change their accent in different moments from line to line. One of the hazards any game where you press a button after every sentence is going to run into is this kind of thing, where tonally it changes. But going from an almost deep southern kind of accent to practically nothing in the same discussion is jarring to say the least. It absolutely kills me to walk into some location and one of the NPCs is decked out in at least 4 GTA heists worth of pimp gold, rings encrusting each finger, and the response to your entry is, "Old citizen, what is your trouble today?" They sound like a friggin' computer in War Games and not the sequel that looks like it was filmed in some YouTuber's basement, but even the good one. Also, I gotta say, I'd love to sit in on any dev meeting when someone said, "You know what's hilarious? Cock rings." Yeah, that's awesome. Let's put some one-liners about cock rings in our game. We'll get to the writing in a bit, but to say it's subtle is sort of like saying a jackhammer's quiet. Gameplay, and a bit about the story. I think we can all sit back and imagine what would happen if you built your fine establishment on an ancient god's hiding place. Imagine Poltergeist, but replace that creepy old seer with the Watcher. That's right, you play the same character from the first game, thrust back into action as one god goes ripping through the landscape, and suddenly the other gods realize he's cheating like a terrible celestial poker player. So what do? Well, they help you go back out and figure it all out. And that means, boom, you're back to low level again, having had parts of your soul shredded off in the process. And so it begins. As I said before, Pillars takes place in the Deadfire Archipelago. Think the Puerto Rican islands, injected with magic users, infused with various pissed off natives all chomping at the bit to chop up their enemies, and then mix in a bit of Black Flag skullduggery, and boom, you have the game. To start off, of course, you choose the sex for your character, and then the race. The race always alters at least 1 and up to 3 of the starting attributes, like adding maybe -1 to dexterity for dwarves, because almost no one must have seen the ballet-like performance of Danny DeVito being birthed from a couch before. Go check it out. Dwarven dexterity hatred notwithstanding, you can then choose a sub-race, which can also add to various attributes for any of the main races. Then you move to classes, with Barbarian, Chanter, Cypher, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Priest, Ranger, Rogue, and Wizard all being choosable with subclasses as well. Then you choose your starting skills. Those are both passive and active now, and you buy points in each one. And then you choose your abilities. And this is when you start to maybe think, I thought he said some of this stuff is different. And it is. That's because every single class, whether one or multi-classed, uses a power source now. For example, Rage for Barbarians and Nature for Druids, with Discipline for Fighters, Arcane for Wizards, and so forth. This is usually refreshed per encounter now, and not per night stayed at campfire, which is a big change. All of these characters sort of fall into 3 groups. Characters that build as battle progresses, sort of allowing them to use more skills, like the Monk, who leaps into battle with almost nothing, only to begin smashing the shit out of everyone as they take damage. Or spellcasters who've gone away from the memorizing of a set type of spells, and they now enter battle with a particular number of spells per level of which they can use them if they're trained on them. Or, for example, fighters who have a points pool for their ability, they can use them again and again until that pool is used up. And almost all of them are restricted in some way to a per encounter pool versus, as I said, a per rest pool. Let me explain. If you enter battle with two folks, one a monk and a wizard, the monk works somewhat similar to the past games. You enter battle, you get hit, you get pissed off, you start pulling off moves. But the magic user can now use a set number of spells from each level that they know, and then in the next battle, do it again, versus going somewhere to rest. And rest has been tied to injuries now, so if you get a particular amount of injuries, your character will die permanently. Those are only healed when you give them food when camping, and they will continually give you penalties if you don't do so, so that's very important. But even more important probably is that empowerment can only be refreshed while resting as well. Now, empowerment allows for you to do one of two things. The first is to cast a spell or perform an ability at 10 times its level, which is huge. Or you can add back to your power pool 50% of its starting. So if, for example, you entered battle, you were able to cast 2 first level spells, 2 second, and a third spell as a third level spell, and then you're done, you can now use Empower to give you back 1 first level spell, 1 second level spell. You wouldn't get a third because it always seems to round down. And admittedly, this is a big change to gameplay. It focuses more on what you can do in a given encounter versus exactly what you will plan for, with only Empower and some particular items being tied to resting. This is good, as the world of Deadfire is huge compared to the previous game, and with the ability to get attacked by sea just while traveling and special story encounters and the normal everyday life-to-life changing events of meeting a squad of lizardmen can cause, it really does make sense to make this change. Because if there's anything that's been added flexibility-wise to this title, it is the adventuring itself. And hey, I know some folks are not going to like this new system, but for me, the combination of pools means some incredibly interesting characters can be made. Mixes of characters with pools built in battle while others start out as a means to end the battle. This can dramatically shift both in terms of the weapons you're using, as well as those pools and of course how you use Empower. Now, as you go up in levels, single class characters get to choose an ability every other level, while dual classes choose 2, but every 3rd level, meaning that while they go up slower, they have a larger selection of skills, and due to the new changes to the per encounter base, you actually get to see them more. The game does restrict the highest 2 tiers from multi-class characters from whatever 2 classes they choose. When it comes to abilities, that's a big deal because those happen to be the heavy hitters, which really feels right for somebody who is trained and focused on one element and somebody who's spread it around a bit. Also, I absolutely love playing around with the AI builder in the game, and while it's not like writing your own code, this allows for you to set up all manner of checks for the characters to use and then abilities and items that they can use as well. So if you're not happy with the aggressive, somewhat aggressive, and why is my character just sprinting from battle presets, this allows you to make your own with tons of choices. It's insane. So how does this all play out in combat? Well, when it comes down to it, it's pretty good. They've added noise levels for everything, so if you think dropping 4 concussive series of magic missiles onto a bad guy's head and causing a thunderstorm in a nearby room, you will get attacked by enemies. That's absolutely going to happen. They've added vision cones so that stealth works more actively, and you have to watch what they're doing. And while the difficulty isn't necessarily hard, it does run from insanely easy on story mode to oh crap on the hardest difficulty, so you do have those choices. But when it comes to battle as a group, I absolutely loved the way it worked. And even when you're by yourself in some specific moments, it never feels like you're completely at the whim of the title. Speaking of characters, let's talk about those for a second. You see the return of 3 from the original, you have 4 new companions, and then you have a newer type of companion called a sidekick. Think of them as companions light. They're there, they have a little bit of an introductory specific event, and you can keep them. They're a lot like the characters that you can hire at the inns, but they have their own starting stories. And of course, stories and how everybody gets along is really important because you have a reputation and disposition system here, as we do in the real world. All hates are added to some book of woe somewhere, and all things you've done are championed far and wide, and that continues both outside the group as well as inside it. For example, large seafaring trade groups who will offer various bonuses and penalties depending on how well you're liked, as well as your companions, where it can open up romances, specific dialogue, and of course, their major companion stories. And all of this, of course, is given to you on your own relationship screen. Now, lastly, you guys may have heard that you have a ship and a crew with their own systems. Think of this sort of like MMOs and their sidekicks adventures that we've been seeing crop up so often. While here you do take a role in piloting and upgrading the various ships you can buy, overall the crew are just sort of there for specific bonuses and for making sure you don't try to take a ship out that requires 9 people and you just took your 2 best friends. You can hire shipmates in the inns as well. Here's the thing though. The game ship-to-ship battle is like the narrative moments of the first game, where skills are chosen and then you sort of remove the fun and any deep gameplay from it. Sure, your crewmate's skills in your vessel is compared to the other vessel and your bonuses taken into account, but it's shallow and looks a little bit like a text adventure. There's no real finesse to it, nor is it cooked to the level of almost anything else in the game. In fact, it appears undercooked. It doesn't even feel like it belongs there. It feels janky compared to everything else in the game. Even the way you make choices sometimes is a little bit bugged, with writing spread across one full page. Then you have to continue to the next page for it to just give you a couple words and then say, hit 1 to continue. This brings me to my second sore point with this game, and while entirely subjective, unlike levels and power-ups and so forth, it's worth mentioning. I was not a huge fan of this story, or maybe it just did nothing to make me a fan. You're not really a pirate, as the game doesn't do much other than sort of have this deep travel system in pirate form, and you have somewhat frequent loading times that do hamper its fluidity as well. When you get to the locations, many of them have small stories or fictions to add to flesh out the world, but they aren't really as interesting as I had hoped. And to be honest, the writing is many times not to say the pretentious level that the original may have been claimed to have, but it does feel a little bit mundane here. I still remember one particular occasion with this interesting puzzle getting through rooms and working towards a center, which seemed like it would be something. Instead, some bad guys teleported in and there was a chest on the ground when I won. Congrats, you made winning as useless as thanks for showing up medals. One of the more egregious moments is when you have this discovery of a power base of an entire group, which should have been this massive story and a cover-up revealed moment, and instead of Darth Vader telling Luke he's his father, you have Cyclops dying in the X-Men. No one gave a shit. I mean, they do for like 2 lines of dialogue, and then everyone's sort of, well, let's see what's next. And sure, if your house is on fire, you don't haggle with your neighbor about the price of a garden hose, but still, that was, for me at least, one of the things I would have loved about the game if they had done so, and certainly love about other games in the genre, where despite everything, the cases of misery and happiness and treachery worked as underpinnings for the larger tale being told and made people worth fighting for, or stealing from at the very least. Overall, Pillars offers a ton of gameplay built on many of the facets we've had before, but altered to offer this engaging gameplay experience that I really did like. It is marred by some questionable voice work, a story that to me didn't seem very poignant, and a location that's a bit more hit and miss, I think, than prior titles, while at the same time larger and many more options involved within it. Fun factor. Yeah, despite not loving the story, I have to say I adored the gameplay in this. And while it does feel easier than Pillars 1, so make sure you can set that difficulty a little bit higher, it just felt like it worked. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC. Now this is coming to the console, but this is just the PC review for right now. And I will say, I do think this is worth purchasing, but for me, that story, and this is again incredibly subjective, just wasn't that interesting to me. I already saw somebody else who said it was one of the best stories they've ever played in a game, so there you go. The sense of exploration in Deadfire is quite high, despite some bumps along the way with some wonky ship combat and some loading times. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Reddit or my Twitter, or follow me on the Patreon webpage and become a patron for the channel. We have an absolutely fantastic patron group. We have a Discord with over 800 people putting together games, playing different games together, and talking in a good, incredibly fun environment. Check it out. It's not too expensive, and it helps me continue to give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.